Puerto Rico, Howard Gutner. Coqui frogs have become a symbol of Puerto Rico. They are named for the sound of their coqui call. The small frogs are light enough to glide to the ground from tree tops. A land of enchantment. The first people to settle in Puerto Rico arrived about 3,000 years ago. Spanish explorers arrived later in the late 1400s. They found indigenous communities, spectacular beaches, and lush forests. There were countless plants and animals they had never seen before. They called the island La Isla del Encanto, or the Island of Enchantment. The iguanas of Mona Island, Puerto Rico, are found nowhere else in the world. Puerto Rico was created by a volcano millions of years ago. The island has more than 300 miles of coastline on the Caribbean Sea. Inland are steep, tall mountains and thick green rainforests. Over the years, much of Puerto Rico's forest has been cut down to clear room for farms and factories and to create lumber. Many Puerto Ricans are working to protect what they still have. They have created nature reserves such as El Yunque National Forest. Many animal species are now protected by law. The largest animals in El Yunque include rats, bats, and brown pelicans. The animals in Puerto Rico flew or swam to the island long ago. Larger animals couldn't make the trip. El Morro is the largest fort in the Caribbean. The Spanish began constructing it in 1539. The finished fort has tunnels, dungeons, and round sentry boxes called garitas. Puerto Rico is part of the Antilles Archipelago, or chain of islands. These islands mark the boundary between the Caribbean Sea and the Atlantic Ocean. Other islands in this chain include Cuba, Jamaica, Las Bahamas, and many other smaller islands. The Puerto Rico parrot is one of the 10 most endangered birds in the world. Most Puerto Ricans live on a rectangular island called Puerto Rico. Several much smaller islands also belong to Puerto Rico. 3 smaller islands are called Vieques, Mona, and Culebra. Vieques is the largest, although only about 10,000 people live there. Mona has no people and a large population of sea turtles, birds, and other wildlife. Culebra has fewer than 2,000 people. It is surrounded by 20 smaller coral islands. A hurricane is a powerful tropical storm. The name comes from the Taino, god of fierce winds, huracán. The Taino are people who have lived in Puerto Rico for hundreds of years. Hurricanes hit Puerto Rico about once every 10 years. In the past, many homes and businesses were destroyed. Now, an early warning system is in place to protect people.
Warm temperatures and consistent rainfall make about 1/3 of Puerto Rico's land ideal for agriculture. Long ago, small farms were replaced by large ones growing commercial crops. Foods such as sugarcane, bananas, pineapples, and coffee are sold outside of Puerto Rico. Most are sold to the mainland United States. Puerto Ricans now eat mainly imported food. Coffee plants were probably first brought to Puerto Rico by the Spanish. The climate in the central mountain ranges is perfect for growing coffee.
An increasing number of tourists are attracted by Puerto Rico's culture and natural beauty. Hotels line Isla Verde Beach in San Juan. In the early 1900s, the economy of Puerto Rico was based on farming. In 1948, a politician named Teodoro Moscoso began to encourage U.S. businesses to build factories in Puerto Rico. For the first time, manufacturing became key to the economy. Although many of these factories closed, newer factories now produce goods such as medicines, scientific instruments, and clothing. More recently, the tourism industry has also grown. Today, manufacturing and tourism are greater sources of income than farming.
Ancient carvings by the Taino people can be seen in the town of Utuado. The goddess Atabe is shown with frog legs. The Taino believe that this goddess created humankind. An early people of Puerto Rico are called the Taino. They traveled to the island from South America about 1,000 years ago. The Taino were farmers and skilled craftspeople. They grew yucca, sweet potatoes, corn, and other vegetables. They made pottery and baskets to use in trade. The men built dugout canoes both for transportation and for fishing. The Taino called the island Borinquen. It means land of the brave and noble lord.
On November 19, 1493, Christopher Columbus landed in Puerto Rico from Spain. At first, the Taino and other native groups lived peacefully with the Spanish, but in 1508, the Spanish began to colonize the island. The Spanish settlers treated Tainos badly and forced some into slavery. Settlers also brought diseases that sickened many indigenous people. Many Tainos died. Some escaped into the interior of the island. Puerto Rico is Spanish for rich port. It was named by explorer Juan Ponce de Leon. Juan Ponce de Leon established the first Spanish settlement on Puerto Rico.
In about 1815, King Ferdinand VII of Spain began to encourage his people to move to Puerto Rico. He hoped to collect money from farming. The new settlers set up large plantations that raised sugarcane, coffee, and tobacco. They used the labor of enslaved Africans. The first major Puerto Rican uprising against the Spanish took place in 1868. Over the next decade, Puerto Ricans won some freedoms. Slavery was outlawed. Life changed again, however, when Americans arrived on the island. In 1898, Spain fought against the United States in the Spanish-American War and lost. Puerto Rico and other Spanish colonies were awarded to the United States. At the time, most Puerto Ricans lived in poverty. U.S. companies ran large plantations and kept workers' pay low. Some people believed that life would get better when they could govern themselves. In 1948, Puerto Rico elected its first governor, Luis Muñoz Marin. Marin helped write Puerto Rico's constitution. He worked to improve education and the economy.
In 1952, Puerto Rico became a Commonwealth of the United States. This gave the island limited self-rule. Puerto Ricans follow U.S. federal laws. They make local laws and elect local government leaders, however. Puerto Ricans are United States citizens, but they don't pay federal taxes or vote in national elections. The island has its own flag and national anthem, but it uses the U.S. dollar and postage stamps. A Puerto Rican timeline. In 1493, Columbus claims Puerto Rico for Spain. In 1898, in the Spanish-American War, Spain loses Puerto Rico to the United States. In 1948, the people of Puerto Rico elect their first governor, Luis Muñoz Marin. He is known as the father of modern Puerto Rico. And in 1952, Puerto Rico becomes a U.S. Commonwealth. The political status of Puerto Rico is still under discussion. Some Puerto Ricans would like the territory to become the 51st U.S. state. Some would like full independence. Others are in favor of continuing as a Commonwealth. So far, Puerto Ricans have voted 3 times to remain a Commonwealth. By U.S. law, only the U.S. Congress would be able to change that status. There are many reasons why Puerto Ricans don't agree on independence or statehood. Some believe that statehood would mean losing their heritage. They could lose their language, flag, and Olympic team. As a Commonwealth, the annual income for workers is among the highest in the Caribbean. Some fear that either statehood or independence would worsen their economy. Many colonial buildings in Old San Juan are painted in bright colors. Shutters on the windows help keep out heat and strong winds. San Juan is the oldest city in U.S. territory. It was founded in 1521 by Juan Ponce de Leon. Much of San Juan is full of modern buildings. High-rise apartments line the shore, but it also has buildings that date from the Spanish colonial days. These buildings are hundreds of years old. They are found in a neighborhood called Old San Juan. In 1955, the Institute of Puerto Rican Culture began to restore Old San Juan. More than 400 buildings have been restored. Many are museums. The area also includes 2 Spanish forts called El Morro and San Cristobal. El Morro was built to protect Puerto Ricans from invaders that came by sea. San Cristobal was built inland. El Jíbaro. In 19th century Puerto Rico, the best farmland was used by European plantation owners. Farms called jibaros kept small farms in the mountains. El jibaro became a symbol of freedom and independence. Many stories feature this character. In art, El jibaro is often shown wearing a wide-brimmed hat known as a pava. He is usually carrying a machete, a large knife used in farming and for cutting thick vegetation. The music of Puerto Rico shows the influence of Spanish, African, and Taino cultures. One Taino rhythm instrument is still common today. The Taino made maracas out of hard-skinned fruits called gourds. Many styles of music are popular in Puerto Rico. Folk songs in styles called bomba and plena tell stories to African, Spanish, or Taino rhythms. A newer style, called reggaeton, mixes Latin American music with reggae, hip-hop, and other styles. The most popular dance music to come from Puerto Rico is salsa. A salsa band may include singers, brass instruments, a piano, maracas, conga drums, güiros, and bongos. Salsa dance is fast and energetic to match upbeat salsa rhythms. Mark Anthony is a Puerto Rican American who helped contemporary salsa and other Spanish-language music find new audiences around the world. There are almost as many Puerto Ricans living in the United States as there are in Puerto Rico. It would be hard to separate Puerto Ricans by their ethnic background. Most Puerto Ricans are descended in part from the Spanish colonialists who started arriving in the 1500s. Many people who were born on the island, however, are a mix. They are descended from native people, such as the Taino, as well as from Africans and Spanish. About 100 years ago, only 23% of the population in Puerto Rico could read and write. Today, that number is nearly 95%. The Puerto Rican school system is modeled on the U.S. school system. Puerto Rico controls and funds its own schools, however. Most children in Puerto Rico wear uniforms to school. Children in Puerto Rico must attend school between the ages of 5 and 17. At first, the U.S. government required all schools to teach classes in English. However, Puerto Ricans protested, and the rule was changed. Since 1949, classes in school are taught in Spanish. However, Puerto Rican students study English for all 12 years that they attend school. Sports have played a part in the lives of Puerto Ricans for hundreds of years. Taino people built ball courts and played a game similar to soccer. Soccer is gaining popularity in Puerto Rico today. However, the sport that is most played on the island is baseball. There are 6 teams in the Puerto Rican Professional Baseball League. Each of these teams is a member of the Caribbean League. They play against other teams from Venezuela, Mexico, y la República Dominicana. In the United States, the baseball season runs from April until October, but in the Caribbean League, the season lasts from October to March. Puerto Ricans celebrate different festivals throughout the year. Many towns in Puerto Rico have chosen a patron saint from the Roman Catholic Church. Each town celebrates its patron saint's festival called Fiesta Patronal. The celebrations include dances, parades, and special foods. Like the music, Puerto Rican food is a blend of Taino, Spanish, and African flavors. Soups, stews, and rice are popular dishes. Some of these are spiced with lime juice, cloves, and cinnamon. Many recipes include a kind of sauce called sofrito. This is made from onions, garlic, cilantro, tomatoes, and green and red peppers. One fruit called a plantain traveled a long way to reach Puerto Rico. When enslaved Africans were brought to work on plantations, they brought it with them. An African dish called mofongo is made from mashed plantains mixed with garlic and meat. Plantains are also eaten fried, stuffed, or grilled. Boiled plantains make a hot breakfast. Candied plantains are a sweet treat. Gracias por escuchar.